Hello, this is Mark Werawath. I wanted to go through what I call lies, truths, and half-truths, and this has to do with electric vehicles. As we get closer and closer to mass adoption of EVs in this country, what we're seeing is a huge battle over what I would call the soul of America. A lot of lies, a lot of inaccuracies, a lot of misperceptions, people who don't understand EVs or are afraid of them. I get it. I get it. I mean, this has been a huge part of American culture, a part of our economy, a part of just how we see ourselves as Americans, right? I mean, after all, what's the American ideal? If it's not, let's say, a Chevy Corvette, right? The soul of America for the last 100 years has been the automobile. The automobile is the source of much of the U.S. gross domestic product. We spent $500 billion building out the interstate highway system, the equivalent of that back in the 50s and 60s. We have nearly 2 million people work in the U.S. Auto industry. The fate of the U.S. is often linked to the fate of the industry. So we assume the industry will only do as well as the country, and the country will only do as well as the industry. And maybe that is true. I mean, we've seen ups and downs in the industry, commensurate with ups and downs in the economy inside the country. So the automobile is one of the few products, the few artifacts in this society that really stirs the soul, and that's for both men and women. The Corvette, for example, is maybe the iconic image of that, and at the same time, it's been announced that the Corvette's going to be going all electric in the near future. So is Winnebago, so is Harley Davidson, so is General Motors as a whole, so is Ford, so is Chrysler, and so is virtually every car company, with the exceptions of maybe Toyota and maybe Nissan, right? But beyond the Japanese cars, even the Korean cars are claiming to be going all electric, which what I mean by that is battery electric vehicles, right? So what is the battle as we see it, this battery electric versus traditional ICE cars? How does it play out? Stories and articles about EVs, they're just totally misinformed, videos and blogs that describe horrible EV experiences. And I know, and no doubt those things happen, right? There's a lot of horrible ICE car experiences as well, by the way. Quasi-environmentalists who say that EVs are bad for the environment. Just recognize on a life cycle basis, the emissions from an EV are less than half of what you're going to get from an ICE car, an internal combustion engine car. Pictures of EVs on fire with barely a mention of the ICE cars that catch fire, that 3, 4, 5 times as many ICE cars every year catching fire versus electric vehicles. So I guess we're all used to the idea that we drive around with combustible fluids, sitting behind the back seat of our vehicles, whether it's gas or diesel. The right impact, the right situation can cause not just a fire, but an absolute explosion, right? Car experts warning that EVs are a scam or are not real cars. And the irony is we've got, millions of these vehicles already on the road. And I think if you talk to the owners, they would tell you they're largely quite happy with them. I know, I'm one of them. I've been driving electric vehicles for 10 years with absolutely no complaints, except that, of course, range does degrade in the cold weather. But I knew that when I bought it, and I know it now, and I've lived it, and I accommodate it. I mean, it's just like the same thing that happens with gasoline freezing in very cold weather. The gas in your car, the water that accumulates in the gas line can easily freeze. So below zero, you better take certain precautions or your gas lines will freeze, right? The fears, right? Limited range, no chargers. There's no chargers, right? Well, guess what? There's lots of chargers. Here's the problem, though, and I think it's a PR problem, but the chargers are largely hidden. So they're in the back lot of a Walmart. They're in the back lot of various gas stations. They're hard to see. There's no big billboard. There's no visible sign. Gasoline, you can see the Shell station, the Amoco station, miles and miles away. So BP, you know where the BP stations are because they're right on the intersection, right? The EV stations are in the back lot. They're behind the buildings. And they do that because it was cheaper to operate, knowing full well that electric vehicle charging is not, frankly, much of a business. There's not much money there. Safety issues, fire and collision. I think we've talked about that, and I'll dispel some of those myths in future slides. Reliability concerns, trust me, there's probably nothing more reliable than an electric vehicle, right? It starts in all kinds of weather, it operates in all kinds of weather. The only thing again is the range. How far will that car go? And frankly, if you know where the chargers are, it really doesn't matter because there's chargers every 50 to 100 miles apart in almost every part of the country. Very high prices. And until recently, I guess that was true, especially if you look at Tesla. Tesla just dropped its prices almost 20%. So you can get a Tesla Model Y, $50,000, and then with the discount and the rebate from the government, in the mid 40s. So it's an amazing deal, considering the average car in America today is selling for $48,000, right? Company stability, is Tesla, stable? I would look at all of the car companies and look at all of their debt and look at all of their balance sheets. And I think you will find that Tesla has the strongest balance sheet of probably any car company. I would almost go so far as to say almost any car company in the country. And guess what? Tesla's not the only electric vehicle company. As I said, General Motors is completely committed, and they've got, more than a handful. They've got dozens of cars coming out, and many of them are already out now. So you can buy an electric Humvee. You can drive an electric pickup truck. You can drive the Chevy Bolt. You can even get an electric Cadillac. The Lyriq is a beautiful car. So they're committed, and this is still early 2023. There's a long way to go. This is a long, marathon we're going to be running here. Inability to service the cars. Well, guess what? There's not much service needed. That's never been an issue for me. But every dealer, for example, Chevrolet, every dealer can handle the Chevy Bolt. But like I said, short of replacing parts, there's almost nothing that's needed. I mean, there's no parts that really need to be replaced. It's washer fluid, tires, wiper blades, cabin air filter. That's it. I'm serious. That is it. There's no other fluids. There's no other part changes. There's no spark plugs. There's no, sensors, nothing, none of that to worry about. Emissions, there are no emissions, right? So the worst story I think I saw was the Wall Street Journal. So here's the context, right? The writers, the authors of the piece, the reporters are taking a trip from Chicago to New Orleans. Supposedly it's a 4-day trip, New Orleans to Chicago and back in an EV. Supposedly it was a disaster. They spent more time charging than they spent actually sleeping, which means that if they're sleeping 6 hours to 8 hours a day, they spent more than 6 or 8 hours charging. Now that could be true, but I'll look you in the eye and say, you know what? Only if you're doing level 2 charging, and level 2 charging is the slow charging that you do at home. If you don't know where the DC fast chargers are, which is what I'm picturing in this picture here, the DC fast chargers operate somewhere between 50 kilowatts and maybe 350 kilowatts. So at the 350 kilowatt rate, you can charge almost any vehicle in less than 40 minutes. And I did the math. I actually did a trip plan from Chicago to New Orleans. You can literally go there with less than 6 or 7 stops. So let's say 7 stops, right? And if each one's 40 minutes, it's 280 minutes. It's less than 4 hours. And that's one direction. So there you go, right? You can do it in 4 hours or less, right? From Chicago to New Orleans, right? So 4 hours of charging, the rest of it is driving. And, frankly, if you don't know where these chargers are, if you don't know what the tools are, I use AVRP, which is probably the best routing tool that's out there. But, PlugShare, it's good for what it is, but it doesn't do route planning, okay? I would do AVRP. I would stick to DC fast charge only, and I would go every 80 to 100 miles. I would not try to stretch to 200 or 300 miles. Every 80 to 100 miles, stop and charge, top off. Every 80 to 100 miles, top off, top off. I would do that in a gas car. I would do that in an electric car. It's just logical. It's common sense. You have to stop anyways, right? Biology calls, you get hungry, you get thirsty. You're going to have to, take care of things anyways. Let's just get the car charged while you do it, right? That's why I have real issues, because frankly, it seems like it was set up set up to fail. So what are the truths, right? The truths are that electric cars lose range in cold weather and or prolonged high-speed driving. Could be as bad as 30%. So think about it, a 280-mile range car, which is pretty typical these days, you can get possibly degraded to 200 miles of range, right? So given that, and given that you want to stay between the sweet spot of, 20 to 80%, right? That means the middle 60 is where you want to keep your battery operating, right? So that means 120 miles of the 200 is usable on a day-to-day basis, on a charger to charger basis. So when I tell you, don't go more than 100 or 120 miles before charging up again, that is why, right? It's to protect the battery and to protect your downside in case there's something wrong with the charger or you have an issue on the road. So Teslas have better thermal management. So that 30% degradation should be better in a Tesla, but they still, look, it's still lithium ion. It's still the chemistry of the battery. There's not much you're going to do about it, right? And if this is, a killer issue for you, if this is, a walk away issue, so be it. Stick to your gasoline car, but in the next 5 to 10 years, pretty much every car being sold will eventually be, if not will be, battery electric. Okay. EV infrastructure needs improvement. I agree. I'll be the first one to stand up and tell you it needs to be better. Tesla has a very good network, right? Now, DC fast chargers, coast to coast, highly reliable, highly available, good quantity. No, very few issues with Tesla. Okay. Not everyone can afford a Tesla. Not everyone wants a Tesla. And I get it, right? If you're not driving a Tesla, you're going to have to use Electrify America. You're going to have to use EVgo. You're going to have to use ChargePoint. And that's just 3 of probably 7 or 8 networks. Shell has a nice network now. They're building out Shell Recharge. So there's at least 3 or 4 networks, right? The problem with many of them is that those chargers are sometimes offline, but there's other chargers in the same location. So I've never had a problem where I couldn't charge at a location. With one exception. The exception was a location that had only one charger and it was down. Okay. So try to avoid those. Try to go to those locations that have multiple chargers. Charging speeds are rarely as high as advertised. So 350 kilowatts, you'll be lucky to get 300. And frankly, the 300 might only last for about 10 minutes out of your 30-minute session. So get used to it. It's just the way it is, right? I mean, even when you pump gas, it's not continuously at the same speed. At the beginning of your charging session, it's going to be slower. At the end of your charging session, it's going to be slower. In the middle, it's when it's going to go the fastest, somewhere probably between 70 and 80% of what's the posted limit between your car and the charging system, right? The EVSE. To get to 90% state of charge typically takes anywhere from 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how low your battery is to begin with. So while road trips are usually inconvenienced, and yes, you're going to have to add maybe 3 or 4 hours on that trip to New Orleans, right? Charging at home is extremely cost effective, and on the road, it's extremely cost effective. So you're going to save 50% of the fuel costs in an electric car on a road trip buying, your charging on public chargers, 50%. You're going to save 90% when you charge at home, which is the vast majority of the time. So my fuel charges compared to when I had a gas car are dramatically lower, easily 70, 80% lower than I had before. The half truths, right? EVs are fire prone. So what's this picture here? This picture here is a burnt out Chevy Bolt. Oh my God, Chevy Bolts. What a terrible story. It is terrible. Something like 15 Chevy Bolts caught fire out of 150,000, right? So what is that? 1 in 10,000 cars caught fire. Actually, a higher percentage of certain ICE cars actually catch fire. But let's just take this as the problem that it is, right? But the good news is nobody got hurt on any of these, to my knowledge, but all the effective cars, because of General Motors being who they are, and this is why I do business with them, right? Offered a replacement battery, no questions asked, right? And at no cost to the customer. Most chose to get that replacement battery. Some obviously did not. They chose to stick with the old battery. All of the batteries that were warranted, that were replaced, were warranted for an added 8 years. So I brought in a 6-year-old Chevy Bolt, and I got a brand new battery, and now I've got 8 more years, almost 14 years of battery coverage, warranty coverage on a car. Tell me where you can get a better deal. I only paid about 30,000 for that car. So to get that kind of, actually 27,000, but to get that kind of warranty coverage on the most vulnerable part of the car, which is the battery, is totally amazing, right? On top of that, the batteries were 10% bigger in terms of added range. So safer battery, brand new warranty, 10% added range, in and out of the garage in one day. One day. In fact, it was less than a day, right? They were waiting on me to pick it up. I wasn't waiting on them, right? I dropped it off and I went on vacation, came back 2 days later, and it had been sitting there waiting for me, okay? The other concern, electric vehicles will deplete all the resources on planet Earth. Well, there's a half truth to there, right? Lithium is an issue. We don't have enough lithium to put 1 billion cars, and convert them into battery electric. I get it. I understand that. But, maybe we can do 20% with lithium, right? We're going to have to find more lithium, but we're also going to have to find alternative materials. And guess what? We have them. Sodium batteries are here. LFP batteries are here. Solid state batteries are here. So those batteries in the next few years will start slowly replacing lithium. And guess what? This journey we are on to replace gasoline cars with electric cars is going to take 20 years. It takes 14 years just to replace the fleet as it is, right? And it'll take us at least 6 years to get to the point where the majority of cars being sold, the vast majority are battery electric. So that's where I get the 20 years. It might take longer. We might still be, seeing gasoline cars on the road, in 2043 or 2044. But guess what? You can go and see, 1960 vintage cars on the road in Cuba. So I'm not guaranteeing every gas car will be off the road, but the vast majority will be battery electric, certainly, in about 20 years. Electric vehicles will crash the grid. If everyone has an electric vehicle, the grid won't be able to handle it. Well, again, we have 20 years to fix that. We have to upgrade and improve and ruggedize the grid. I totally agree. But let's put it in perspective. A typical EV uses about 32 kilowatt hours per day if you drive 100 miles, which is an awful lot of driving. That's probably triple what most people drive. Let's assume 100 miles because it's an easy number to remember. 32 kilowatt hours is exactly what central air conditioning uses. So are you going to tell people, no, you can't have central air conditioning because it might crash the grid? Have you looked around? Almost every home has central air conditioning. And guess what? The grid has not crashed. Are you going to tell the new construction that they can't have central air conditioning because it might crash the grid? Why don't you be the first one to turn yours off, okay? The grid will need to be ruggedized and capacity expanded. I agree. But in parallel, it will be turning greener and greener. More solar, more wind, more geothermal, more hydro, more nuclear. All of these are zero emissions, right? All of these will green the grid. It's happening now, it's happening at a very fast rate. I'm not saying solar alone can handle base load. I know it can't. I'm not saying wind can handle base load, but I am saying battery storage will make those technologies more viable. Nuclear is the future, in my mind, of the foundation of our grid, which is, base load. And guess what? There's still some hydro opportunities and there's still some geothermal opportunities. So can we get rid of fossil fuels altogether? Again, I think coal will be gone in probably 5 years and possibly fossil fuels as a whole within 20. We've made large investments in natural gas. It's going to take a while to get that turned over. But again, in about 20 to 30 years, we're going to have a green grid and a largely battery electric fleet of vehicles, right? Okay. Here are the truths behind the lies, right? EVs are affordable. Tesla can be had for the mid-30s with the rebate. Tesla's not going out of business soon. They got one of the best balance sheets in the business. Their cash position, their debt is so low, their cash is so high. Trust me, they're not going anywhere, right? Electric cars are capable of coast-to-coast travel. You do need to plan your travels. Don't go out there and wing it like a reporter going to New Orleans, right? You're going to have to plan it out. Where are you going to stop? How long are you going to stop? ABRP, a better route planner, is the best tool I've ever used for route planning. I've used it twice to go to Colorado, several times to St. Louis, several times to Ann Arbor, Michigan. I live in the Chicago area, so these are not trivial, trips. In fact, the Colorado trip was 1,000+ miles in each direction. So no problems, no issues. Yes, I was delayed. Yes, it was a little bit inconvenient. My wife gets upset. I drop her off at the Panera Bread while I charge the car. She's getting her coffee. She's getting her soup. She's getting her sandwich. I'm charging, right? I don't want her to be inconvenienced. There are a lot of EV chargers in the world. Many are DC fast chargers. They're adding, thousands of them on a year-by-year basis. So soon we will be flooded with EV chargers, right? Again, the Tesla network is the single best charging network, except when compared with all the others. When you combine all the others, and I mentioned EVgo, ChargePoint, Electrify America, Shell Recharge, guess what? You add those together, they far outnumber Tesla, almost 3-to-1. So what's the best analogy? If anyone's flown in general aviation aircraft, you're not going to go across country on a long trip without a significant amount of planning. What are your weather conditions? What's your route? What airports will you stop at? Which airports are friendly to your aircraft? Which airports can support your aircraft in case of problems, and which ones have the fuel that you need? Some of these airports have a single fuel pump. You pull up to that airport, that fuel pump's broken, you call ahead of time. Is it still working? Do you have fuel? I'll be there this afternoon. Thank you. Right? That's why you have a flight plan. You file it, you go over it, and you make sure it's complete, and you have some backup plans, right? So unfortunately, you can't drive from coast to coast and whimsically decide where you're going to stop, when you're going to stop, and where you're going to get fuel. It just doesn't work that way with an EV. It doesn't work that way when flying general aviation aircraft. So with that, I will say, thank you for listening. Thank you for understanding that there's a lot of misinformation out there. Talk to people who own the cars and who've driven them for a while. Talk to people who know what they're doing, right? And just learn how to adapt, because frankly, this is the way the world is going. Okay. Thank you very much.